What's up, everybody? It's the Brownwaterb Banter podcast. I am Jared Seymour.
I'm Joey Cates.
And, man, we got a great episode today. We have Mark and Chris here from something I'm assuming most people on the Gulf Coast have heard of, the Hurricane Hunters, man. Yeah. Super excited to have y'all in the studio today. Thanks so much for coming out. How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Good deal. Like I say, man, I know a lot of people have heard y'all's name before living here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Hurricanes are kind of a big deal for us. 2005 Hurricane Katrina, probably one of the biggest things that's happened here, and all of the storms in between from then, before then, and ones that we'll face in the future. Y'all play a humongous part in getting vital information to our region, but really the whole entire United States, and I'm sure that that information goes everywhere throughout the world, right? So, yeah. One other cool note real quick before we get into this podcast, just so all the people listening know, Joey is super, super afraid
Terrified.
of the weather.
Absolutely
of all the
terrified.
people I know, he is the most scared of thunderstorms. Anytime the wind
blows. I'm not
blows.
too scared to admit it. I'm not too proud to admit it.
Yeah. So this is going to be fun to talk, have this conversation here with Joey.
This is my worst nightmare coming true.
But we'll start with you, Mark. Can you introduce yourself to the people and what you do in the Hurricane Hunters?
I'm Major Mark Withy, and I'm a navigator with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. And so I'm the guy that's in the radar finding the safest way through the storm.
Very important part of the,
Yes.
the operation. And Chris, could you tell us what you do, man?
So my name is Tech Sergeant Christopher Carranza, and I am the Public Affairs Specialist for the 403rd Wing. And I'm basically his hype man.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's why you're here today, man.
Yeah.
Everybody needs one.
I make sure that the information that they gather, any
Right.
kind of photos, video, I put that out as soon as I can and let the world know what's going on.
Okay. Yeah.
Sweet.
He brought a glitter machine and fog machine and all kind of strobe lights for him, but
Yeah.
we didn't have the time or the ability to hook all that up. So
Right.
sorry about that.
Well, the fog machine would scare him, I think.
Right. Joey got nervous, so I had to turn it off. But so walk us through a little bit of the history of the Hurricane Hunters. How long have y'all been around? I know in my lifetime.
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
it really started back in the 40s. There's a guy that flew through a storm on a bet.
Really?
Yeah, flew a train plane through, and that kind of really started the idea of, hey, you can fly through a storm and not die. And so then after that, weather reconnaissance flights began in an official manner. Go out, find out where the storm is, see what it's doing. At that point, there was no satellites, anything like that, so
Right.
it was airborne reconnaissance that started it. Been a variety of specialized aircraft that have done it over the years. In recent history, though, it's all been the C-130 platform.
That's the plane we think of when I think of Keesler Air
That's the
Force Base.
big barges, right? The big,
Yeah.
huge things.
Yeah, 4 engines.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's when I think of Keesler Air Force Base, that's the plane that I think
Yeah.
of the most. So, so y'all started flying that plane through these storms.
Yes, and so there's a few reasons for that. It's big aircraft that can carry all the equipment required. 4 engines, so you got some safety factor in there.
No
Right.
doubt.
So the J models that we're flying right now, those for those that are kind of familiar with the C-130, those are easily distinguished from the earlier H models. They have the 6-bladed props.
Okay.
And we've been flying those, the J models here in the Hurricane Hunter mission for almost 20 years now.
Okay. That's I know the props that you're talking about. They have a distinct look to them.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with the Hurricane Hunters? Like, how do you wake up one day and say, I'm going to fly planes in the storms? That's what I want to do.
So I spent a decade on active duty flying regular C-130s,
Okay.
and did a bunch of tours in the Iraq and Afghanistan region, and navigator is not a growth career field in the Air Force, and so I was looking for other options.
Had to branch out.
Yeah, and I knew some guys that had been down here and done this, and it sounded like a pretty awesome opportunity.
Yeah.
So about 5 years ago, pulled the trigger on it and came down here. And it's a very different mission than what I was used to, but it's a lot of fun. It's really awesome.
Were you nervous going in for the first time? I mean, obviously being in a war zone like you're talking about, right? You served, you said in Iraq and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess, maybe a hurricane isn't quite as bad, but I know I would be.
It's worse for me.
I'd be white knuckled on the side of everything, holding on.
The big thing is you're really changing your mindset. In for really anyone in aviation is you're avoiding the weather.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a thunderstorm, you just steer clear of it. Here, we're going into the biggest storms, and we're finding a safe way to pick our way through into the center of it. So you're kind of changing the way you think about flying into weather. But apart from that, no, not really a nervous thing. It's just, hey, this is kind of something new and cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we mentioned a little bit before we started recording, we were going over some of this stuff. We got this big map out here, and I know most people you're not going to be able to see it from the video here, but can you talk us through, like, y'all, what is your mission, right? Before it's named a named storm, right?
Sure.
You talked about that. It's your job to go out there and figure out what it is, where it is, and where it's going. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess probably the best way is to start how with how storms come across.
Sure.
There's a lot of different ways that storms can, or places where storms can originate, but I think what a lot of people think of is they're coming across the Atlantic, and
From Africa.
So they're coming across from Africa, and so they're going to be on satellite for a long time because they're out in the middle of the Atlantic, and so they'll be being watched as they come across, and when our area of responsibility starts at 54 West, so out past here.
Okay.
They're going to be looking storms that are identified or potential storms that are identified. That's going to be getting watched, and then if there's something of interest, we'll be forward deploying or to some place that we can then fly it out of. We have a forward operating location in St. Croix is our normal area. That gives us the reach to get out to
a jump off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So go out there, and then depending on how the storm is developed, we may do an investigational flight.
Okay.
If it's not certain that closed circulation has started with the storm, or we may just go straight to a fix mission if the storm is developed enough. So we'll go out there.
Mm-hmm.
We'll start making passes through. They'll have a pretty good idea based on satellite data where the center is,
okay.
But then we'll start flying it and getting actual direct measurements of what the storm's intensity is, and just gathering the data to help feed into the computer models. And
you said, and this was one of the things I was thinking of earlier, bringing and thinking about it again now, with all the satellite technologies that we have nowadays, right? A layman like myself, you might think, well, can't we just get all that information from the satellite, right? But that's not true, right? There's only a limited amount of what they can get from the satellite imagery and that type of thing. You actually still obviously have to go in the storm and measure it. Is that right?
Yeah. So the satellites, what they can do is pretty awesome,
mm-hmm.
but they don't allow for direct measurement of the intensity of the storm. And where you kind of really see the value in what we do is once we do have that first flight and the data that we gather is fed into the computer models, how much that changes the ability to model where the storm is going and how it will develop. So yes, there's a lot that satellites can do, but ultimately directly measuring the intensity of the storm and gathering that data is essential.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. We talked about it too. You don't fly above this. That's one of the things that I thought. I was like, that's probably super scary, but at least you're above it. That's not correct.
No, we're.
I knew maybe you dipped into it for a minute, but that's wrong. Like
right
you're
into the eye of the storm.
Yeah, we're flying through at 10,000 feet, right through the middle, and right in the thick of it, and it gives us the best opportunity to get the center of the storm, and to directly measure what's going on in the wind bands and measure all the things that we need to.
You how do you go about flying into a hurricane, right? You talk about you pick a location and then y'all fly like we said, NASCAR
pattern.
You fly left turns only, is that right? Or mostly left turns mostly?
Yeah, so we fly what's called an alpha pattern. If you look at it on the chart here, it's an X pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
When we're looking at a storm, they're going to be gathering a tentative center from the satellite data,
mm-hmm.
and then the mission planners will be looking, okay, where are we flying from to hit at that, and then get an entry point. We'll start out 112 miles from the center. It's then fly into the middle, fly out the other side, make a left-hand turn.
I'm looking at the map. People that are listening audio only, and again the video probably got it. But it's like if you think of a clock, you hit it. This is obviously 3 dimensions of space, but you hit it at about 11 o'clock, right? And you're flying almost to like 4 o'clock ish, right?
Yeah. So it's intercardinal. So if you think of your cardinal, north, east, south, and
Right.
west, we're intercardinal. So we'll enter from we can enter from any point, but we'll be, say in this case, entering from the northwest,
Right.
and exiting to the southeast.
Okay.
Make a left-hand turn going up to the northeast quadrant, and making a left turn going inbound from there.
And what? Go ahead, Jay.
Well,
Go
at
ahead.
this point, you don't know where the center is.
We've got a pretty good idea. So they're going to be watching on satellites, and they'll have a pretty good
Right.
idea. For a well-developed storm, you're going to have a pretty good idea. So the satellites are going to be able to give you a pretty solid tentative center, and then the movement of the storm.
Right. So like the NVEST, though, where it's not, you're
Yeah.
going to fly in there and
Yeah.
try to pick it apart to see where the actual center is.
That's correct. And those you're flying around looking for closed circulation,
Right.
and hunting for a center of low pressure.
Mm.
What are some of the things that y'all are measuring when you're inside of there? Obviously, wind speed.
Yeah, wind speed, temperature, humidity. If you're in an invest, you're going to be steering clear of clouds and not entering into the weather because we're down low, and we don't want to get in a situation where the weather could put us in a tough spot. But in a storm, there's sensors that are looking at the rain rate and a lot of other things like that.
Okay. I'm just picturing this big plane going through the hurricane. I mean, for the pilot and you as a navigator, are you constantly having to readjust, based on what the storm's doing and where you're at in it and how it's trying to turn you around? Am I thinking of that the right way?
There's as you get wind gusts coming through, the pilots are going to be working to keep the airplane flying on
Right.
course. But for the most part, when we're flying from the entry point to the center, we're just flying a specified track. Once we break through the eye wall and are in the eye of the storm, then the weather officer, the RWO in the back, is going to be giving course corrections based on what their sensors are saying, as we search for the very center, the point of lowest pressure.
What's that feel like when you punch through to the center and it's like all clear and everything? I mean, that's got to be some breathtaking images,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sure,
pretty
huh?
cool.
It can be pretty cool, and there's certainly some great pictures out there that we've taken. These massive stadium of clouds, it's up around you, and it can be pretty cool. It can also be somewhat underwhelming as well, is that not all eyes are
Formed,
open
yeah.
and clear,
Yeah.
and as well formed as
Right.
as you see in those real glory pictures.
Right.
So a lot of times you break out and it's just
It's more
less
thunder,
clouds.
lightning, and rain.
You're not going to have a lot of thunder and lightning, but you'll have clouds, and so you'll see the eye wall somewhat, but then it'll be obscured by clouds.
Yeah, well, the
That's
more
cool.
formed it is, usually the stronger of a storm it is too,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
worse for the people around here,
Yeah.
We don't, they cause a lot of destruction, but there is some kind of beauty in those photos when you see like those satellite imagery of the whole thing.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
awesome
well-defined.
looking.
Yeah, it's pretty magnificent.
It is, us being from around here.
As long as it stays out away
Right,
from
right.
us, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
It's like looking at a pretty tiger that can
Yeah.
rip your head off. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
you can
that's-
still appreciate its beauty, I
Yeah.
guess, as long as it's in a cage and not
Not
coming
eating
towards
us.
it.
So before we move on,
Yeah.
I know you're talking about flying through. So they don't fly straight. If you're
Yeah.
like in aviation,
Yeah.
they actually do what's called, if you want to explain.
Oh
the
yeah,
crabbing.
so that's
pretty
a
cool.
good point that Chris brings up.
Because I'm
is-
definitely thinking straight.
Yeah, just plowing straight
is,
ahead.
is we're flying through it. It's rough air penetration speed is what aviators would think of it as, but flying through to 180 knots, and then you're dealing with winds that are 150
Yeah.
knots. So you're kind of like for guys that are down here on the Gulf Coast, you're steering into the current to adjust for the
Yeah, that was
drift.
kind of my earlier question.
Yeah.
Like, I
So,
think
yeah,
you got
so
to be constantly trying to fix that.
Yeah, there'll be times where the plane is, if you're looking at it, looks like it's on a 45 degree angle flying through the wind, and that's just what's required to stay on course.
Wow. Yeah, that's that. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
That's
for
when your
sure.
stomach starts dropping a little bit.
Is it a lot? Like the only frame of reference I have is a commercial airline flight.
Sure.
Right. And I've been in turbulence and probably twice, and it was probably not hardly anything. But
Yeah.
that feeling of when the plane just kind of
Yeah, like the
squats
elevator
down and you can
feeling.
feel like you just dropped. Is that a lot of that?
Yeah, there's some of that.
Because I know on a commercial flight, like honestly, I'm like this, and that might just push it back down.
Yeah.
It'll go back down. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm super nervous. I'm praying.
Yeah, power's going
Right,
out. The
but I just
stewardess is
see-
losing
I
peanuts
see,
everywhere.
Exactly. I see you next to me on Southwest, and you're like looking at me, and you're not even sweating.
Yeah.
You're just
now,
man up, dude.
So, yeah, there's for people that aren't used to it, there probably is a lot of turbulence. Most of the time, it's nothing too crazy. Going through the inner wind bands, and you'll get to some areas where the planes bounce around quite a bit, and you won't necessarily want to get up and walk around.
It's like a washing machine.
I bet.
Yeah,
Nope.
He's up in the front, but I've been in the back.
Yeah.
And you just see all this water, and then there's a load master back there that we don't have a stewardess, but he's in charge of the passengers back there. And when he goes, this means buckle up, sit down, and stay there.
So
you
Start
listen.
doing this.
So you get nervous, right? You get nervous?
Just a little bit.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
good.
no,
that
there's no
that makes
way,
me think y'all are human.
Yeah.
How many people are a part of this operation in the plane?
Okay, so the basic crew complement is 5. You'll have a pilot and a co-pilot and a navigator up front. In the back, you'll have the load master and the RWO, which is the weather officer. Now, that's the basic crew complement. On longer flights, we'll try and bring along extra crew members. Most often a pilot. Just give the pilots a chance to get out of the seat
Yeah.
Okay.
and take a little nap. Yeah, if you're out on a 12-hour flight, the idea of sitting in a seat for 12
That's
hours
crazy.
and trying to be on your game, that's really
And
something.
that's usually a short trip, you were saying, right? Usually around 12 hours?
well,
is-
yeah, 10 hours is about the average. And we can get up to about 12, not much beyond that.
Okay.
And then sometimes, down here in the Gulf, sometimes they'll be real short, like Nestor last year.
Uh-huh.
That was just a tropical storm, I think, but we took off and we're essentially just climbing up to our altitude and entering
Right.
what we call the storm environment. There wasn't much right off the coast here, but it was right here on our doorstep, so it made it pretty easy.
Yeah.
I don't think we said this though. How long are you in the storm for? It's a significant amount of time.
Yeah, so a lot of times it's going to be around 6 hours in the storm environment. Now that also depends on what the fix requirements are. So fixing is when we establish the center of the storm. Those are tasked by the National Hurricane Center, and that is driven by the proximity to land, so they'll set those requirements. If a storm is well out at sea and still not a threat, we may be doing 12-hour fixed pacing. So you'd fly out, make a couple passes through, and then come back. As it draws closer to land, you'll be moving to 6-hour fixed pacing. So fly out to the storm, hit the first time, we'll say it's at noon, and then we'll keep flying patterns through the storm until the second fixed time at 6. So yeah, you can go 6 hours. Beyond that, we can, as it draws closer to land, we can go to 3-hour fixed pacing. But you're going to be bringing more aircraft in because obviously there's a limit on our crew duty day and how long.
Is there typically just one plane, or do y'all do like one in and then another one swaps, and then how does that work?
Yeah, so that's pretty much the way it goes. Is we'll swap out. One plane will go in. So
Day shift, night shift.
Yeah. So typically, if we're say going on the road, we'll have 3 aircraft go down there, and you'll just cycle through.
Okay.
So one plane will go out, hit the 2 6-hourly fixes, and then 6 hours after that, then the next plane will be coming in and hitting that.
Gotcha.
And then y'all are just sending all this live numbers back, right?
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. Is you can watch in real time, pretty much our data streaming back
Right.
from the aircraft. People at home can watch the data on Google Earth or a bunch of different apps. And then
I'll watch
He's
it.
going to be
believe
on
me.
there now.
Believe me, I'll watch it.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
when
you
there's a
already watched their
storm,
data?
I've watched it on the website that we talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I watched it on there. It's like live streaming. I'm like, yeah, got my little plotter
He's
here.
trying to
making
figure it
sure,
all out. He's at home.
Please
writing
don't
stuff.
come this
Yeah.
way. Yeah, but that's awesome what y'all do.
How far south are you responsible for, and west?
So west goes clear to the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay.
And that's something that we do. I think every year in recent memories, we've had storms heading out towards Hawaii. So kind of mentioned earlier, 54 West is the eastern bound of our area of responsibility, but then going all the way out to Hawaii.
That's a big area to cover.
Who has this other part? Is that England, Britain?
Well, nobody really. So there's kind of certain ways that storms will act.
Right.
So there's storms that they'll come off the middle of the Atlantic and they'll just hook up to the north.
Correct.
And we kind of call those fish storms because nobody cares but the fish. By the time, if you have a fish storm, it heads up the center of the Atlantic, it's probably going to run out of steam before it's
hit cold water.
Yeah,
and fizzle out.
it hits cold water, fizzles out.
Yeah, this is the strike zone.
Yeah.
Down here.
So
right?
what
That's
about
where all
the ones
power
that
comes
curve all the way back and then go back into like Ireland and stuff like that? You know what I'm saying? Like those storms.
We haven't flown those. That's outside of our normal area.
Right.
That doesn't happen a whole lot.
Correct.
But people keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Okay.
We keep pretty busy just with our
Right.
area.
Joey's trying to get y'all more work.
Yeah.
Y'all don't need no more work, huh?
Yeah, so you mentioned down here by the Yucatan, is that right?
Yes.
Y'all follow some stuff that usually pops up and develops there, right?
Yeah, so a lot of times you see that.
Isn't this the later in the season storms? Am I remembering that right? Usually?
Yeah, that's
like,
what it usually seems like. Now, having said that, it's like predicting the weather, you know?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Last
Knock
year,
on wood.
we weren't even in storm season yet, and
Yeah.
there was some stuff that popped up in mid-May that we started flying.
I just always feel like it's like when you get that kind of in the back of your mind, like, so it's almost over. We almost made it all the way through. And then there's always some damn thing that pops up right here.
Yeah.
You're like, what are you
Well,
doing, man?
that
What
one
are y'all
that
doing
hit
down there?
Florida 2 years ago.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the one that came out from down there as well.
It's like
wasn't it?
a creeper storm.
Yeah, and by that late in the season, you're thinking, hey, it's late in the season, we're almost out of it.
We're good.
And then-
But you also got to remember there's this big pool of warm water,
Right.
the Gulf, that's there to fuel anything that pops up.
Yeah. Yeah.
and those are the ones that usually spin up
Yeah.
in 1 or 2 days and go from Cat 1s, Cat 3s all the way up.
Yeah, and that's something that we've been looking at more is what's called rapid intensification. Is these storms it'll go from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 in very short order.
Yeah, we don't like that.
No,
No,
No, we
not
don't like
at
that.
all.
You mentioned about the ones out here towards the West Coast, though.
Sure.
We don't really think we're selfish. We don't think
Sure.
about those as much.
Hawaii gets left
but
off.
you made a good point. Yeah, they go up the northern part of Mexico, or the western part, and then up north towards us. And cover Mexico, but then we get like the Arizona regions get all the flooding from it, right?
Yeah.
And so y'all are responsible for tracking that, right?
Yeah, so you'll see this throughout the season is storms will pop up on the western coast of Mexico and then usually meander up towards the northwest and we'll go fly those. Usually that's flown out of Keesler. Occasionally we have forward deployed to the west coast. But we'll go fly those, and then at some point they'll either just become a fish storm or they'll head off towards Hawaii, and then we have to start looking at forward deploying to Hawaii just to be able to fly it out of there.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's a haul from Biloxi.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's a good 2-day haul to go. We'll typically jump from Keesler to someplace on the west coast, and then the next day jump out to Hawaii,
Wow.
and then start flying the storm out of there.
That's pretty cool. One other thing I want us to cover too, because this one is the one you mentioned again. We chatted this up before we started recording. That I didn't think about. People and probably don't even realize this, right? Obviously, hurricanes. It's in your name, like we get that part of it. But there is a floating Mississippi River, right, of water that exists. It just floats around in a particular spot of the atmosphere, correct? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, the jet stream.
That's right. And it can dump water wherever it decides to dump water at, right?
Yeah.
And y'all monitor that.
Yeah, so that's our mission this time of year is atmospheric river program, and that's with the Center for Western Water and Weather Extremes. That's with the Scripps Institute at the University of California, San Diego, and we will go out and have aircraft based on the West Coast and then another in Hawaii. And what they're looking at is essentially, a Mississippi River of water that's coming through the atmosphere and hitting the West Coast. And how's that going to impact rainfall in California, Arizona? How can they best manage the water that they have? How can they alleviate some of the problems with excessive rainfall causing
flooding,
all those
mudslides,
and
all other stuff.
And so that's one of the things that we do in the off hurricane season.
Right.
Then also we have the National Winter Storm Operations Plan, which has us. It's primarily flying off the East Coast. There's patterns that we fly out there for the nor'easters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big thing. Like the Weather Channel names these winter storms as well as they do hurricanes. So I mean, that's all the stuff y'all are doing.
So just because it's not hurricane season, we still have a lot of stuff going on.
You don't just
Y'all's
sit
name
around.
your name would be too long if you had to put everything you cover in the name. So I like just keeping it short like that.
That's awesome.
What did we describe what this piece of gear here is right here?
Yeah. So going back to the pattern we fly through the storm. We're going in there. The aircraft has some sensors on it, but we're also dropping these weather sensors from the plane. This is the primary weather instrument we drop. It's a drop sonde, and it's just a little sensor package. So as we come in flying through the storm, we're going to be dropping sondes at the entry point, looking at the winds, and this is going to be falling to the surface.
Okay, so you just drop them out the plane, let them hit
correct.
the ocean.
Yeah, there's a tube in the bottom. The loadmaster will load it in, release it. It radios the data back to the aircraft that's then relayed via satellite to the National Hurricane Center.
People that are listening, it looks like a little mini torpedo, kind of. Really, it's about.
Then y'all retrieve them.
No.
Those don't. They're just they send and they're done.
Yeah. So these will drop to the surface and then they sink.
Okay.
And they just.
One-time use, baby.
Yeah,
one-time
disintegrate.
Fishing reef.
Yeah.
It's a little over about a foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a Pringles can.
There you go. That's exactly what it looks like.
Yeah.
So we're going to be dropping one at the entry point. Then as we fly through the storm, we'll be dropping one of these in through the wind bands. Typically, they're going to be looking at the highest wind speed as you're going through the core bands around the eye. Then we're going to be making those turns, looking for the center of the storm where the pressure's lowest, dropping another one there, then dropping another as we exit back out through the eye, and then at the turn point as out at 112 miles out.
So that little thing's picking up a lot of, or sending back a lot of data. Right?
Yeah, so it's got these sensors here, and it drops down. There's a little parachute here. That's
cool.
Yeah, so it parachutes down to the surface and radios information back to the plane, and then we send it back.
I bet that little guy has hell in the middle of a storm. Like he's a big, you know what I mean?
Beat up all over the place
with a parachute in the middle of all those gusts. Like, thank you.
Yeah,
dude.
they get tossed around a good bit. It's sometimes pretty cool to hear what they're doing because we'll drop these, and we're going to be flying a powered aircraft through the wind bands into the eye, but this thing's just flying.
They're just on their own.
So those wind bands are going 100, 150 miles an hour. So this thing will get whipped around, the ring of the storm.
That's cool.
And you're like watching it where the daddy come back.
Like those fireworks that you shoot up and the little paratrooper comes around.
Yeah,
just
wherever
the wind takes
spun
it.
around in a washing machine like super fast.
Yeah. When you get the data, where is it going? Where's your data go first?
Okay, so first, this is going to be radioing back to the plane. It's going to go to the loadmaster. The loadmaster is receiving it and doing some basic QC on the data. They're going to be the first thing is looking at, is this falling at the right rate? If the parachute doesn't deploy right as it goes out of the plane, it's what's called a fast fall, and the tube's not going to be, the sonde isn't going to be.
So you just scratch out.
Yeah, then you'd be prepping to drop another.
Okay.
So the loadmaster is gathering all that data. Once the loadmaster has QC'd that and done what they need to do, they transfer it over to the weather officer, and then the weather officer is putting together it's called a vertical data message, something at VDM, that is then relayed back to the National Hurricane Center.
Okay. And then the National Hurricane Center puts it out to the weather channels and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, kind of was talking about hitting those fixed times earlier. And those fixed times, part of the thing that they are doing is they're going into model runs for climate modeling. So as they update the storm tracks, they want to get this data in at particular times so it can be integrated into the computer model.
Okay.
So they, the strength of the wind and the kind of the center of the wind through that thing. How do they know the steer and where it's going and movement and all of that?
Of the storm?
Right.
So as it's coming across the Atlantic, you can watch it on satellite and see where it's going. And then once we start in it, we have tentative numbers on where the storm's headed. But as we make our multiple passes through, I'll be looking at the movement of the storm and updating that. And so, you can
So
see,
like the little spaghetti models, how
Yeah.
they always go.
Well, I think that's computer generated based off
Yeah,
of the information
that
that
is.
y'all are giving them, right?
Yeah, so the spaghetti models, those are going to be computer generated.
Right.
But just for us in the plane, we're going to be looking at the movement as we make multiple passes through and updating, the next pass through.
So their information is actually what's happening now.
Yeah.
The spaghetti models
It's
are
what's
what we think
predicted.
the
Correct.
computer tries to
Yeah.
predict what will happen next.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we're in the plane. We're not really
Right.
going to be looking at what the spaghetti. As
Yeah.
the navigator, I'm looking at, okay, how's this thing moving? Because each of these passes is going to be roughly hour and 45 minutes. So if the storm's moving at 10 knots and it's going to be an hour and 40 later, where do we need to be steering the next time through?
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. A little more real time kind of, look at it versus what, someone like us who's back at home, we want to know where it's going.
Yeah,
you
we
know
wanna
what I
know
mean?
if it's going to hit
But
us.
you got to start with what y'all are doing, obviously, to get
Right.
that
Yeah.
information.
And so the spaghetti models that you're going to be seeing, those are going to be bringing in a lot of other data.
Mm-hmm.
So you've probably heard when they're prognosticating on where the storm's going to be, there's a high pressure here, low pressure
Right.
here,
Right.
and how that's going to steer. And that's pretty important for the forecasters to come up with where it's going to go.
Yeah.
For us in the plane, we're not going to be worried about that because we're out
Y'all
there
know
for
where it's
6
at.
hours.
Yeah, y'all are sitting in it.
I just need to be concerned about where do I need to be when I'm making the next
Right.
pass. And
We know it's right
hour
here.
45,
It's
yeah.
literally right outside the window.
Yeah, I definitely. That's a cool way to look at it. What y'all are looking at versus what the general public is wanting out of it as well. But it
Yeah.
starts there with the data that y'all are getting.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome, man. You shared. I saw your Twitter page that had I guess a photo of the humidity that was tracing behind the propeller. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
That was an amazing photo. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, so that's just a picture I took. It's pretty neat that when it's high humidity,
Yeah,
as it often
which-
is around here.
almost every single day.
Yeah.
And you'll see that there, there's pictures of fighter jets at air shows pulling
Right.
Gs and
Right.
doing that. Obviously, we're not going to be doing those sort of maneuvers in the C-130, but the props generate those vapor trails. It makes it look pretty cool.
Yeah.
I talked to you earlier about the how I'm deathly terrified of lightning and how many times that the plane might actually get struck by lightning in one fly or pass or hit or whatever you call it, right?
Yeah, so we do get hit by lightning. It's something we try and avoid.
Oh, man.
We kind of mentioned Nestor last year was a storm with a lot of lightning. Went in there, we did get hit, but that's typically something we try and avoid. Lightning can damage the plane,
Right.
so we'll try and avoid that. We fly through stuff that nobody else is going to fly through.
Yeah.
However, there's also things that we try and avoid. Lightning is something we obviously try and avoid.
Right.
In extreme precipitation areas, you can have problems. So you try and avoid areas with extreme precipitation.
And that's just the weight of the plane, I'm guessing, or
You'd want to. I think probably the biggest concern is looking at how it affects the performance of the plane, and how you'd want to position the plane to penetrate
Right.
areas of extreme precipitation. You can flame out the engines if you put enough water through them. So obviously you want to keep those engines running.
yeah, absolutely.
I think this would be a good time to explain why y'all use props as opposed to a jet engine.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah.
a good one.
Yeah.
I guess kind of what you
that's
just said, huh?
Yeah.
question
So
all the
and
time.
actually, it's got this big old blender out in front of
Yeah.
Right.
the intake, and that's going to help protect it. So yeah, it works
It works
better,
better
than a
in
big,
those conditions than a jet would.
open-faced,
Right.
high bypass engine.
Yeah.
So the propellers actually block the water and anything
Yeah,
else.
they have
coming
some
into
effect
the
to that,
engine.
and you'll also see that in hail a lot. Is we'll encounter areas where there's a lot of hail,
Yeah.
and that's also something we'll try and avoid because hail can beat up the
Damage the
plane.
impeller and stuff.
You'll see as we go through the season, the leading edges of the aircraft, they'll get pretty worn looking as the rain and hail beats the paint off
Yeah.
off stuff.
And all y'all's planes are at Keesler.
Yes,
the
that's
ones
correct.
down here, right? They
Yeah.
do all the maintenance and upkeep and
Yeah,
stuff like
so
that
we
at
have
Keesler.
10 WC-130s that are stationed here at Keesler. There are the other hurricane hunters, our NOAA brethren. They fly a couple of P3s, and they're out of Lakeland, Florida.
I didn't know there was another one.
Okay, so we're sort of the operational side. We gather data for the National Hurricane Center.
Okay.
They have a more research-oriented mission. So they're going to be flying, we may even be flying storms at the same time, but they may be looking at specific areas that are of interest for their scientific research.
Traffic inside of a hurricane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some
Y'all
pictures.
like waving at each other.
Yeah,
Talking about-
I have some pictures of the NOAA P3, 2,000 feet below us in the storm. It's pretty cool. Like, hey guys.
Trying to hit
What's
him
going
with the
on?
sensor.
Yeah.
Drop it down. Drop it down.
Yeah, so that's
Oh, you missed
actually
him again.
a
Damn
good
it.
point. Is that we do take great effort to avoid conflict in there, because nobody wants to get a drop zone through their windshield.
Yeah,
No.
who wants to be the pilot? How did you hit someone in a hurricane? You were in a hurricane. Like,
Yeah.
It was just
how
you
did that
two.
happen? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't realize that. So, and they're based out of where? I know you mentioned it.
Lakeland, Florida.
Okay.
And so
okay.
that's something that they're, there's I think some confusion sometimes. Is there's the NOAA hurricane hunters that they fly the 2P3s. They have a similar but different mission from us.
Yeah, but like you said, theirs is more researched based.
Yes.
Okay.
And that would just be where storms are starting up, or how many storms happen a year. And
I can't really speak to the specifics. We do
Right.
have some folks that work for both organizations. But yeah, they have research projects that are going on.
I gotcha.
They also have a Gulf Stream that will go and fly up high, and they'll sometimes do a circle around the perimeter of a storm, depending on how things are going.
Are y'all on Facebook? Or y'all have a Facebook page?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
No,
That
definitely.
people can reach all through that.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
You can see all the photos, all the videos, anything that I can get my hands on.
You're gonna put it out there.
It gets posted. Yeah.
and everything
most
goes
definitely.
through you, right? Correct?
Yes. So the 403rd Wing Public Affairs Office, we handle the.
What do y'all do in the community other than, like, obviously you're doing this podcast in here where people can
So
run
this
into
is,
y'all?
this is one of the big portions is the media
Right.
outreach,
Yeah.
and then we do community relations. So we'll be out here with leadership and community engagement. Show our faces, let everyone know who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
And as a reserve unit, we're actually the tenant. So you have two wings here at Keesler. The 81st
Yeah.
Training Wing, that's the host,
Okay.
the owner of the base. And that's, their main mission is under Air Education Training Command.
Mm-hmm.
So they're teaching and, bringing up the new airmen that come out of
Right.
basic training to do their jobs. And there's all kinds of different career fields here. On the other side, we have the 403rd Wing, which is us, and we're the reserve unit. So there's about 300, almost 400 of us full-time that they call us air reserve technicians. So we're civilian throughout the week, and then we're whatever rank we are during the weekends, duty weekends.
Okay.
And we just do the same job. And
I didn't realize that distinction there. I'm glad you pointed that out.
yeah, so that's a huge piece. Major Withy and the Hurricane Hunters being reservists, but they're the only team, the only unit that does their
job.
Their job.
That's awesome.
And there's it's worth mentioning our counterparts or brethren at the 815th Airlift Squadron, the other squadron at Keesler. They fly regular C-130J models. They fly TAC. They deploy to the desert, flying combat missions. So not every C-130 you see flying around the local area is a hurricane hunter. If you see two aircraft flying in formation coming over Ocean Springs,
Yeah.
that's going to be our brothers at the 815th out
Okay.
there doing their low-level flying training.
Okay. Y'all ever try to trick one of them and say, hey, y'all got to come get in the hurricane with us today? Like some scheduling shit happened. I'm sorry, we need you.
Yeah.
Come on, you're going. And just
So
like watch
yeah,
them.
so we have
I would do that.
there are some folks that are trained and fly both missions, but it's kind of two different
Yeah, I would assume.
two different paths.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big difference there. So
And it's different people like doing different things,
Right.
and some some of us would rather never see the desert again. And
I bet.
some of them would never like to go inside a hurricane.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever.
Well, gentlemen, we appreciate y'all coming out here today and
It
talking
was
to us. I was super pumped for this one.
absolutely
I want to
awesome.
thank LB at the Wayward Kraken for hooking this up, man. He was the one that put this together, shot us a message, and put us in contact with one another. So we really appreciate it. We thank y'all for what you do. Thank you for your
No
service. A lot of good information here from people that live on the coast. We rely on y'all heavily. So thank you very much for what you do.
Yeah, thanks.
And thanks everybody for listening. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
Yeah.